as we have said, the new bill introduced this week by Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Ilhan Omar, as well as a number of other members of the House of Representatives, will cancel all student debt in the United States, all of it. Now, people keep saying things, those who object to this bill, like, but we can't afford it, or what would that do to the economy, or that isn't fair, things of that nature. So here to join us now on this and other topics is a person who arguably knows as much as anybody about the macroeconomic effects of canceling all student debt. That is to say, the effect of canceling all student debt on the entire economy, because she was the lead author of a paper that looked at exactly that for the Levy Institute. Stephanie Kelton is a professor of economics and public policy at the State University of New York in Stony Brook. She is a leading expert on what is known as modern monetary theory. She's former chief economist of the U.S. Senate Budget Committee for the Democratic staff. She's been named by Politico as one of the 50 people most influencing the policy debate in the country. She's been on the program before, and she joins us now. So first of all, Stephanie, thanks for coming back on the program.
Happy to be back.
Secondly, student debt, $1.6 trillion owned or owed by more than, 46 million people, give or take, in this country. For giving it all, a good economic idea or a bad one?
Well, I think it's a good economic idea. At least that's what the data bears out, and I think it's both, logical at some level. I think, if you asked people, suppose you had 45 million people who, every month had to take out their checkbook and repay student loan debt. What do you think would happen if, instead of taking out the checkbook and writing a $500, $600, sometimes more than $1,000 check to repay student loan debt, what if they could keep that money and do something else? What do you think would happen? I think most people's instincts would lead them to say, oh, they'd probably spend it in other ways, right? And so that turns out to be the case. And what we did, my colleagues and I, in this research paper that we published, as you mentioned, with the Levy Economics Institute, was just to ask this hypothetical question. It was really not intended as a policy proposal per se, but more of a, I wonder what would happen if sort of exercise. And so what we did was model the macroeconomic effects of canceling, wiping out what then was 1.4 trillion. See, it's been about a year and the problem continues to metastasize. So now we're at 1.6. But we let the macroeconomic models answer the question for us. Would it be economically beneficial to do this? To, I guess, no one's surprise, at least the economists who did the research, the answer the models gave us was yes, there would be a variety of benefits to the economy as people were able to spend that money in other ways.
And you used, just to be clear, you didn't use fringy, out there economic models. You used the standard tools that people use to measure the effect of something like this, right? So
that's right. We did not use the unicorn model. Right. We worked actually, we were fortunate. We got to work with Mark Zandi at Moody's, and Zandi Analytics. They've got some models that they've developed over the years to run these kinds of simulations. So we worked with Mark and his staff, and we used his model. And then to make sure that the results were really robust, we wanted an answer from another conventional macroeconomic model, and this one's known as the FAIR model. Its creator is Ray Fair. He's an economist at Yale. And so both of the models supplied us with an opportunity to ask the question and get answers, from two different standard macroeconomic models.
And there's something I wanted to get out on the table in this conversation, because we're talking, Stephanie Kelton, about the fact that canceling this $1.6 trillion in student debt would help the economy grow. And I just want people to understand, because we've heard a lot of Republican talk, certainly, that canceling or let's say giving a tax break for 1.5 trillion to the wealthiest Americans was going to be great for the economy. But I think, I mean, you tell me from a technical point of view, it seems to me common sense would say, yeah, but that's going to billionaires who are just going to put it in the bank anyway, so it's not going to help create jobs. But the people who are getting, who would get this student debt cancellation will go out and they'll go to restaurants, they'll buy homes, they'll get a car, they'll do things that actually create jobs. But that's just my lay interpretation of it. What is the technical response to that?
Well, that's pretty good, Richard. I mean, yeah, so in a way, what the Republicans did was a form of cancellation, right? Because you had all these corporations and taxpayers, especially those at the upper end of the income distribution, who were scheduled to make higher tax payments under the old tax rates. And then the tax rates were adjusted. And it's effectively canceling the payments that would have been due under the old regime. And so it is in many ways like a form of cancellation, except that 83 or so percent of the benefits in terms of the individual tax cuts went to people in the top 1% of the income distribution. And then, of course, you had the corporate tax cuts as well. So, you know, it's sort of common sense in a way, I think, to say that if you give a huge windfall to the people who already are doing extraordinarily well, do you think those are the people who are going to go out and say, oh, the car's been breaking down on me. I'm finally in a position to go out and, you know, now I can afford a car payment. So I'm going to replace that old beat up car. Now I can finally get the refrigerator that's been on the fritz, or the washing machine. You know, I can finally afford to do these things. Look, these people in the top 1% are consuming about as much as they want to consume, and throwing some additional disposable income their way tends not to boost their consumption very much, because they can already afford to meet whatever their consumption needs and desires are. So if you're disproportionately sending the benefits of the tax cuts to the people who are least likely to turn around and spend that income back into the economy, then it's probably not much of a surprise that the tax cuts that were touted as this great, you know, boon for the economy that was going to rain jobs and boost wages and have all of these, you know, spillover or trickle down effects to people, you know, through the income distribution didn't quite work that way.
Well, and it was a few years ago. I don't know if you remember this study, but I saw a study a few years ago saying that the uppermost income brackets in the country and in the world actually have so much money on hand that they're not even investing, much less spending new money that they get, new income that they get, because they've not only spent everything they can think of to spend, but they've basically invested as much as they wanted to invest. I'm trying to remember the study now, which I shouldn't do on the fly, but basically that the ultra wealthy are so glutted with money that it's really giving them more, as the Trump tax cut did.
So you're saying they have so many Lamborghinis and so many properties scattered all over the world that they can't find the time to visit them all and drive them. They can't figure out what else to do. You give me more money, I'm simply out of things to do with it. That's a remarkable problem to have.
Right, but so we're saying that. So you're saying that this idea, which you studied in the abstract, of course, before Senator Sanders or Representative Omar came up with their bills, but you're saying that this idea is great for the economy in a way that, for example, the Trump tax cut is not. You're also saying that it would create anywhere from 1 million to 1 million something new jobs per year, according to your study and the models you used, for a period of several years, right?
Yeah, that's right. So the peak job creation is at about 1.5 million. That's in a single year at the height of the benefit from the cancellation. The average is something closer to about 1 million additional new jobs for the economy as a consequence of this. So, and you know, you mentioned the tax cuts again. In a way, canceling student loan debt does work like a tax cut in the sense that it leaves people with more income to spend. And so, it's through what economists call the income effect, that relieving people of that debt service payment that they're making every month and allowing them to figure out what they'd like to do with that money instead. So it's tantamount in an economic way to a tax cut for some 45 million people, and then the spillover effects reach well beyond those who are receiving or benefiting from the tax cut itself. The indirect effects spill wider into the economy.
Well, and to me, that's a very important point, Stephanie Kelton, because it points to, I think, the argument that people are now making, now that it's part of the political debate because of the Sanders-Omar bill. People are saying, well, why do we want to help those relatively privileged college students, people who went to college? I mean, one obvious answer is that not everybody who owes student debt graduated from college. Some people didn't go to college at all. They went to trade schools or other universities, but other private institutions. But I guess the other side of that argument is it's not just benefiting those people, but it's benefiting the million and a half during the peak years of people who would get those new jobs who aren't necessarily college people at all, right?
Yeah. If you're working as a busboy or a waitress in a restaurant, and the people who have student loan debt, when they're surveyed about, people ask them, in what ways, if any, is the student loan debt that you have today impacting your lifestyle? And these surveys exist, and 2/3 of people with student loan debt say that the existence of the student loan debt is causing them to delay major purchases, home buying, car buying, and other major appliances. So they're putting that off. 2/3 of people, 4 in 10, 40%, say that student loan debt is the reason that they're postponing either getting married or starting a family. So, you work in I don't know if Babies R Us, I guess Babies R Us doesn't exist anymore, but, stores that sell strollers and things that people buy when they're starting a new family, crib bedding and furniture and all those sorts of things. Those are people who benefit when this wet blanket, when this burden is lifted, and all of a sudden people can get back to living again, to making the kinds of decisions, go out and buy the car, go out and, get married, buy a home, furnish a home, have some money to go out and eat. So I mentioned the waitress. Now, I have an extra $250 a month in my pocket. Normally I don't go out and eat, but now I feel like I can go out and eat, and I can, leave a more generous tip when I go out because I have a little bit of extra cash to work with. And so those are just some of the ways that people who aren't immediately relieved of student loan debt end up benefiting in other ways.
Well, I saw a meme on the internet the other day, and of course there is no more authoritative source of economic data in the world than memes on the internet. But it was a meme, I think, from the Bernie Sanders campaign, saying that over 400,000 young people have been would be more likely to form new households if student debt were canceled. I don't know if that's true or not, but certainly there's a significant number out there. So in addition to the kinds of purchases you're talking about, that's also contractors and painters and,
absolutely, electricians, carpenters. Yeah. Years ago, when I was working in DC, actually, I ended up getting invited to come talk about this issue, which at the time I didn't know very much about at all, but I went over to the National Realtors Association. I might not be getting the name exactly right, but it's right there in DC. And, we were talking about the impact of student loan debt on home buying, and home builders, feel this. And the president of the association said at the time, this is a huge, huge deal for us. And I said, well, have you talked about it? And I was shocked that he said that they hadn't, as a potential lobbying issue, they had remained pretty quiet on this, in spite of the fact that he said it was really hurting them, and they recognized that. So, yeah, absolutely.
So, and last, maybe second to last question on this one. I know that one of your co-authors of the Levy Institute report on the the macro effect of canceling student debt also wrote that it would reduce the racial wealth gap in this country. I think he wrote by 12 to 1 to 5 to 1, which is, of course, still outrageous and needs to be addressed, but it would actually help the racial wealth gap to cancel all student debt in the country. Is that your understanding as well?
That's my read of his work. Yeah, his name is Marshall Steinbaum, and I think that was a piece that he co-authored with Julie Morgan, and I think I saw it on the Roosevelt Institute website. But I'm familiar with the piece, and yeah, that's what they found.